The morning I saw a yellow excavator chewing through my grandfather's walnut trees, I knew the people from Hawthorne Hills had finally crossed a line they couldn't uncross. It was barely 6, the sun was still soft over the pasture, and there was this ugly cough of diesel floating through the air, mixed with fresh dirt and broken roots. The kind of smell that tells you something living just got torn out of the ground. I stood there in my boots, coffee still in one hand, watching a contractor swing that bucket through a row of trees. My granddad planted the summer my father came home from the Navy, and for a few seconds I didn't move, because sometimes anger hits so hard it turns quiet first. The foreman saw me and gave me that little wave men give when they know they're standing somewhere they shouldn't be. Then he held up a folded permit like it was holy scripture, signed by Cassandra Vale, president of the Hawthorne Hills Homeowners Association, part-time luxury realtor, full-time queen of other people's business. They were putting in a storm drain, he said, like he was telling me the weather. 42 inches of concrete pipe, 800 feet across my land, carrying runoff from their golf course, their pool deck, their fertilized lawns, and dumping it into Miller Creek, where my cattle drank and where my daughter used to catch crawdads when she was little. Compensation was $12,000, non-negotiable, and Cassandra had already told the county I was being unreasonable. That was her favorite word for people who didn't bend fast enough. Unreasonable. My name is Garrett Boone. I'm 57 years old, and I've lived on the same 90 acres outside Dry Hollow, Texas, since before I knew how to spell my own last name. My grandfather, Ellis Boone, bought this place in 1961 with money he earned, welding pipelines in West Texas, and folks laughed at him for it because back then it was just brush, rock, clay, and one stubborn creek that ran even in August. He spent 30 years turning it into something. Dug 2 wells by hand before he could afford equipment, planted walnuts and live oaks, fenced pasture until his palms split open, and built a barn so square that old men still compliment it when they drive by, which is the rural version of applause. On my 30th birthday, he gave me the deed and said, "Garrett, land doesn't make noise when people steal it. You have to speak for it." I remember that sentence while that excavator kept tearing. I remembered it while Cassandra Vale stepped out of her white Lexus wearing sunglasses big enough to watch a solar eclipse through, smiling like she had arrived to bless a charity event. She looked past me at the broken trees, then back at my old work shirt and said, "Mr. Boone, I hope we're not making this harder than it needs to be." I said, "You're digging across my property without asking." She tilted her head, just a little, like I was a child who had misunderstood a bedtime story. We did ask, through the proper channels. The county approved a public drainage easement. Hawthorne Hills represents nearly $200 million in residential value. Your ranch is important to you, I'm sure, but we have to think about the broader community. Broader community. That meant people behind gates, people with lawn crews and wine fridges, people who moved out here for peace and then complained that cows smelled like cows. I wanted to tell her exactly where she could put her broader community, but my wife, Molly, says I have a face that confesses crimes before I commit them, so I took a breath and stayed quiet. Cassandra mistook that for a weakness, which was the first mistake. Then she pulled an envelope from her bag and handed it to me with 2 fingers, like she was passing a napkin to someone contagious. $12,000, more than fair, given the condition of this property. I looked at the check, then at my walnut trees lying on their sides, roots exposed like broken bones. "You think this is about money?" She smiled wider. "With men like you, it usually is." That was the second mistake. Because what Cassandra didn't know, what nobody in Hawthorne Hills knew, was that 15 years earlier, during a drought mean enough to make church ladies curse, I had bought a failing private water company called Blue River Utility through a holding company named Ellis Creek Partners. I never put my face on it, never gave interviews, never bragged in town. I hired a manager, kept the books clean, and let the company do what water companies do, quietly, invisibly. Blue River served 9 small communities, 3 farms, 2 schools, and 1 shiny gated development called Hawthorne Hills. Cassandra thought she had just stepped on an old rancher. She had no idea she had put her heel on the one pipe her whole little kingdom drank from. I did not tell her that, of course. A man does not show his whole hand just because somebody in designer boots thinks she has won the first round. I signed what the county put in front of me, took the $12,000 and photographed every page, every stake, every machine, every tire track, every tree they ruined. Molly watched me that night from the kitchen doorway while I sat at the table with dirt still under my fingernails and a legal pad full of notes. "Garrett," she said softly, "please tell me you're not about to do something stupid." I said, "No, ma'am. I'm about to do something patient." She didn't laugh, but she did bring me coffee, which after 32 years of marriage means she was officially on my side. The drain went live the next week, and by Friday morning, my cattle stopped drinking from Miller Creek. Not one or two, all of them. They stood along the bank bawling at water they had used their whole lives, acting like something dead was floating in it. I filled 3 mason jars, drove them to an independent lab in Abilene, and paid extra for same-day testing. The technician was a skinny fellow with nervous hands and a ponytail tucked under a ball cap, and when he came back with the results, he looked at me like he was sorry for both of us. High alkaline levels, heavy sediment, fertilizer residue, traces of pool chemicals, and a petroleum marker he said could have come from a runoff. In plain English, that creek had been turned into a rich man's gutter. I drove straight to the Hawthorne Hills clubhouse, which looked less like a neighborhood office and more like a bank that sold perfume. Marble floors, cold air, flowers no one had grown, and a receptionist who stared at my hat like it had asked her for money. Cassandra made me wait 45 minutes, then called me into an office overlooking the golf course, where sprinklers were throwing clean water into the air like they had no idea water could become a courtroom exhibit. I put the lab report on her glass desk. "Your drain is contaminating my creek," I said. "I need you to stop the discharge and pay for testing, filtration, and water for my cattle until this is fixed." She barely glanced at the paper. "Our engineer certified the project. Your engineer is wrong." That made her smile. Not a happy smile, a polished one, the kind people practice before ruining somebody. "Mr. Boone, your operation is old, under-maintained, and frankly not aligned with the standards this area is moving toward. Maybe your cattle are the source of the issue. Maybe your pasture management is poor. Maybe you should consider that progress is not always an attack." I leaned over just enough for her to notice. "Progress does not usually smell like chlorine and diesel." Her smile dropped half an inch. "Then sue us." She tapped the report with one red fingernail. "But we both know you won't." That evening I called Warren Pike, my manager at Blue River Utility. Warren is the kind of man who says less in a whole week than some men say backing up the trailer. But he knows contracts like a preacher knows funerals. "Whole Hawthorne Hills," I told him. "Every clause, every amendment, every overage, every environmental covenant." He emailed the file before midnight. Page 19, Section AD, gave the utility the right to surcharge up to 300% if a customer created upstream contamination affecting local water resources. Section 11B allowed the provider to require corrective action at the customer's expense. Section 14F allowed suspension of service for unpermitted infrastructure tied to the system. I sat there staring at those clauses while the refrigerator hummed and Molly slept upstairs, and I felt something settle inside me. Cassandra had spent months treating me like a fence post in her way. She had forgotten that fence posts hold the line. I bought 6 trail cameras the next morning and placed them in mesquite, cedar, and one hollow stump my grandfather used to hide beer in when my grandmother was mad at him. 4 nights later, I had footage of Hawthorne Hills maintenance crews opening drain access covers and dumping grass clippings, pool filter waste, and bags of fertilizer sludge straight into the pipe. One man even said, "Clear as church bells, just get it in there before Boone starts whining again." That was when it stopped being negligence and became arrogance with a timestamp. I saved the footage in 3 places, then hired Dr. Bell. Nolan Reyes, a hydrology consultant from San Antonio, who spent 2 days testing above the drain, below the drain, and inside the runoff channel itself. His report was clean, sharp, and deadly. Boone Ranch was compliant. Hawthorne Hills was the source. Unpermitted chemical discharge, likely Clean Water Act exposure, livestock risk, creek contamination. I mailed Cassandra a copy by certified mail, along with an invoice for the lab, for work, emergency cattle water, vet bills, and damaged trees. She did not call. She did not apologize. Instead, 3 days later, every mailbox in Hawthorne Hills received a glossy newsletter titled "Protecting Our Community from Rural Neglect." And there I was, printed in full color, the backward rancher poisoning their children, abusing land, refusing progress. They used a photo of my barn taken from the road at the worst possible angle, with peeling paint bright as sin in the afternoon sun. By dinner, my daughter Lacey called crying because someone had taped the newsletter to the door of her veterinary clinic with the words "animal killer" written across it. Molly's school principal got an anonymous email asking if a teacher married to a known polluter should be trusted around children. That did it. A man can swallow insults aimed at himself. He can even chew them up and pretend they taste fine, But when a bully reaches past you and puts hands on your family, patience changes shape. I called Warren again and told him to audit Hawthorne Hills from the day they connected to Blue River. 48 hours later, he found unpaid water overages, 12 unapproved irrigation taps, and 3 private wells drilled without proper authorization near a protected aquifer line. The total exposure was not $12,000 anymore. It was not even close. Cassandra had wanted a fight with an old rancher. What she had bought herself was a war with the water company, the county, the press, and every buried clause she had never bothered to read. The first notice went out on a Monday morning, Blue River Utility letterhead, certified mail, signed by Warren Pike, and that plain little signature of his that looked harmless until you read the numbers underneath it. Hawthorne Hills owed unpaid overages, penalties for illegal taps, immediate corrective action for unpermitted wells, and proof of environmental cleanup within 30 days, or service could be suspended under the contract they had signed and apparently never read. By noon, the neighborhood Facebook page was on fire. By 3, Cassandra's attorney was calling Warren every 10 minutes trying to find out who owned Blue River. By sunset, somebody in Hawthorne Hills posted, "Did we pick a fight with the guy who controls our water?" And that comment disappeared so fast you could almost hear Cassandra slamming the delete button. 2 weeks later, Dr. True Reyes' report hit the county office, and the Dry Hollow Sentinel ran the trail camera footage on its front page. Hawthorne Hills crew caught dumping waste into drainage line, and suddenly the same people who had crossed the street to avoid me at the feed store were stopping me in the parking lot to say they never believed that newsletter, which was sweet, in the same way a screen door on a submarine is sweet. Cassandra tried one last move. She came to my ranch in person, driving too fast down the gravel road, white Lexus shining like a dental crown, and handed me a settlement agreement for $75,000. In exchange, I would drop the complaint, say publicly that the creek issue was a misunderstanding, and agree not to oppose future development near my land. I read the first page, set it on the hood of my tractor, and said, "Cassandra, you keep trying to buy the wrong thing." She crossed her arms. "Everyone has a price, Garrett." I looked past her at the stump line where my grandfather's walnuts used to stand. "Maybe. The mine is not written on your paper." Her face hardened then, the shine finally wearing off. "You have no idea how ugly this can get." I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because it was funny, but because it was the first honest thing she had said to me. "Ma'am, you made it ugly the morning you dug up my family's trees." Then the storm came, 9 inches of rain in less than a day, and that cheap, undersized drain failed exactly the way Dr. Reyes said it would. 3 sections split. Gray water poured into my lower pasture, and Hawthorne Hills lost pressure in half the neighborhood. Their perfect lawns had muddy water coming out of kitchen faucets. Their clubhouse shut down. Their spa canceled appointments, which I'm told is how rich people experience hardship. We had sensor data, drone footage, water samples, and damage estimates before Cassandra even had a statement drafted. The county called a public meeting that Friday, and the room was packed shoulder to shoulder: ranchers, homeowners, reporters, county officials, everybody breathing the same stale courthouse air. Cassandra sat up front with her lawyer, looking smaller than I remembered. Reyes explained the drain. Warren explained the contract. A county investigator confirmed the illegal wells were under review. Then I stood up. I had not planned a speech. I just looked at those people and told them the truth. My family wanted to be left alone. Your HOA wanted my land, then my water, then my name. I tried quiet. I tried polite. I tried fair. None of it worked. Cassandra stared at the floor. I pulled out the ownership documents and held them up. Blue River Utility is owned by Ellis Creek Partners. Ellis was my grandfather. I am the managing owner. The room went silent in a way I will never forget, like every whisper had been cut with a knife. I turned toward Cassandra and said, "You thought I was just the man standing in the way of your expansion. Turns out I was just the man standing in the way of your expansion. Turns out I was also the man keeping your faucets running." By the next morning, she resigned. Within 48 hours, the new board accepted every term: removal of the drain, full restoration of my pasture, payment for damages, a permanent conservation easement protecting my ranch, and a public correction clearing my family's name. Later, investigators traced the smear campaign and threats back to people close to Cassandra, close enough that a real estate license became a problem she could not smile her way out of. The day they removed the pipe, Molly brought lemonade to the pasture, my daughter brought her clinic dog, and my neighbors showed up with barbecue, folding chairs, and the kind of laughter you only hear after a long, hard thing is finally over. I stood by Miller Creek at sunset, watching clean water slide over the rocks again, and I thought about my grandfather saying land does not speak for itself. He was right. But I learned something else too. Sometimes water speaks louder than any man can. So you tell me, was I wrong to use the utility contract against them? Or was that the only language people like Cassandra understand? If you have ever dealt with an HOA, a developer, a neighbor, or anybody who thought money made them untouchable, drop your story in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me where I crossed the line if you think I did, and if you believe small people should still be allowed to stand up to big power, subscribe. Because next time I'm telling you about the man who tried to move a fence line in the dark and learned the hard way that my grandfather measured everything twice.